The Prime Minister has insisted the privatised rail network is working ahead of a weaker strike disruption for London's tube and train passengers. Theresa May made the comments at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is there. So Simon, Mrs May doesn't think renationalising the rail network is a good idea, but others disagree.
Faye, for more than 18 months, commuters on Southern have had to put up with one of the worst rail services in the country. There have been delays and cancellations caused by staff shortages and, of course, the seemingly endless strikes. On Tuesday, members of the RMT will stage their 35th walkout in the dispute over who closes train doors. And it's also spread to some Greater Anglia trains. Now, Labour believes the railway industry should be brought back into public ownership. The rail unions think so too, and it's a view that might be shared by many frustrated Southern commuters. But the Prime Minister certainly doesn't share that opinion, and today she emphatically defended the privatised rail industry.
Not everything's perfect, and if you're on Southern Railways, you probably certainly think that with all the strikes and disruptions that they have had. But I can remember the days when the railways were nationalised, and what people get today is a far better service than what they got under the nationalised railways. They get more investment in the railways, they get greater reliability, there are far more passengers using the railways, the number of journeys that it's possible to make on the railways has increased, the number of services has significantly increased. So we do see a better service today.
After her catastrophic election performance, Theresa May desperately needs this conference to go well, but inevitably all eyes are on Boris Johnson, the former London Mayor and now Foreign Secretary, who arrived here a short time ago, with many people here wondering what will his next move be.
OK, Simon in Manchester, thank you.
Now, after a weekend of intense speculation about his leadership ambitions, the former London Mayor, Boris Johnson, was keeping everyone guessing at the Tory party conference in Manchester today. He stayed away from the conference centre for much of the morning and did his best not to speak to the waiting media when he arrived in the afternoon. Well, our political correspondent Simon Harris is in Manchester. Simon, he hasn't been doing much, but he's still causing a headache for the Prime Minister.
Yes, he is, Geraint. Boris Johnson is normally one of the star turns at the Conservative conference. He isn't usually camera shy, but today he was keeping his head down and refusing to give any interviews. When he did finally emerge from his hotel, accompanied by his bodyguards, there was an unfortunate moment when a camerawoman got knocked to the ground as the former mayor made his way into the conference centre. Some Tories here are furious with Boris Johnson for what they see as his leadership ambition and manoeuvring. And one former minister suggested to me that the Prime Minister should sack him.
The Prime Minister has an option, which is to either allow Boris to continue to, dare I say, make trouble, because I think that's what it is, or to get rid of him. She was told by the 1922 committee that she had their authority to do that if she thought it was necessary. My view is that, we have enough problems in a complex negotiation, the like of which none of us have seen since the Second World War. The last thing we want is dissent among the ranks of the cabinet.
Tomorrow, the Foreign Secretary makes his conference speech. When he was mayor, he was treated like a messiah here. Party members loved him. We'll see tomorrow afternoon whether he's still the conference darling. Geraint.
Simon Harris, thank you very much.
The Prime Minister has told our political correspondent that the fire has taught her that all those who live in social housing should have a voice and should be listened to by those in charge. She told Simon Harris at the Conservative Party conference that she is still in contact with some of the residents affected and believes the government did get it wrong in the first few days after the tragedy.
I think one of the most important things that I've learned, and it came to me at a very early stage when I first met residents after the Grenfell Tower fire, that terrible tragedy that took place, one of the most important things I've learned is that there is a problem when social housing tenants raise their voice, they raise concerns about safety, and those concerns are not listened to and not acted on. It's not only in Grenfell that we've seen that, we've seen it elsewhere in London, and that's why I've asked Alok Sharma, my housing minister, to go around the country to listen to social housing tenants, to hear direct from them the concerns they have, so that we can look to ensure that we can put better support in for them, because their voice must be heard.
Do you accept your reluctance to meet some of the survivors immediately was clumsy and insensitive?
No, I went to the hospital at a very early stage to meet some of the victims. and I've met residents on a number of occasions. I think what was important was that government was ensuring that the response and the support was in there. And initially, of course, it wasn't there.
You may have met them, but it came across that you were insensitive. And you've heard this term Maybot used.
Yeah, I don't think, you see, I don't think it should be an issue about me or what I was doing. I think it should be an issue about whether government was there to help and support people. And
so
that's what we did.
You got that wrong?
Well, I did meet people, but as I say, I don't think it's about me or what I was doing. I think it's about what government was doing to support people. We recognised that the council support for people was not there on the ground, that we got it wrong, the response was wrong in the initial stages. That's why we put a lot of effort in to ensure that we can provide the support and help. It's why I've been listening to residents, not just immediately after the fire took place, but also subsequently hearing from them about the concerns that they have, taking those matters up with the local council and ensuring that that government support is there even when the cameras have gone.
So you're still talking to them, you're still seeing them, meeting them?
A few weeks ago, I met a number of residents, yes.
One of the things that we know is that still only 8 families have actually moved into permanent accommodation. Something like 150 households are still in hotels. Do you think it's fair to say that perhaps there should be a deadline? Can you promise that they'll all be given new homes by Christmas?
Well, one of the things that has been, I know that Sajid Javid discussed, the Community Secretary discussed with the residents, was the need to ensure that the accommodation people are going into is the right accommodation for them, rather than trying to rush them into accommodation that might then turn out not to be suitable for them. I think we've got to get the balance here right, but I think that is important. A significant number of new homes have been identified. Some residents who went into temporary accommodation have asked for that to be turned into their permanent accommodation, and that's being put through as well. So we're making every effort is being made.
But not setting a deadline?
Well, I think certainly we set an initial deadline, as you know, for people being offered temporary accommodation. But of course, for many people, it was very difficult in the immediate aftermath of this terrible tragedy to be in a position to be able to consider what they were doing and their future. Looking at the permanent accommodation, what we're trying to do is to ensure that that permanent accommodation is right for the residents and that they're not rushed or pushed into accepting something that isn't going to work for them.
Prime Minister, thank you for talking to us.
The Prime Minister speaking there a little earlier to our correspondent Simon Harris, who is at the Tory party conference in Manchester. Simon can join me now. Simon, while Theresa May was speaking to you earlier this afternoon, it meant she couldn't watch one of the star performers in the conference hall.
Yes, that's right, Nina. Boris Johnson, he did nothing to disabuse us today of the theory that he wants Theresa May's job. He gave the sort of conference speech we've come to expect from him. To be fair, there was nothing he said in his speech, nothing in his script which Mrs May could have taken issue with. He was totally on message. But it did once again underline just how hugely popular he is with ordinary members of the party. The hall was packed for the first time this week, and they loved it. There were jokes aplenty, mostly at the expense of the Labour leadership, but he also had a popular successor at City Hall, Sadiq Khan.
All I can say is look at London today, storming ahead. Even if the new mayor isn't a patch on the last guy, by the way, he seems to spend. He seems to spend his time rather ineffectually trying to ban things. Why can't he do something for a change?
Well, tomorrow will be a chance for us to compare and contrast, because that's when the Prime Minister, Theresa May, makes her big speech to the conference. And somehow she has got to convince party members, those who were cheering Boris Johnson today, that she's worth sticking with and not to take a chance with trying someone else like Boris Johnson. Nina.
Simon Harris, thank you. Theresa May's big speech at the party conference had big aims. It was supposed to unite the party and the country behind her after she lost the Tories' majority when she called a snap election. It also promised to deliver a better Britain. Crucially for Londoners, she was going to promise to build more council houses. She did, but no one is talking about that tonight, because the speech itself was beset with problems, from a coughing fit to a comedian handing her a P45 on stage. Our political correspondent Simon Harris was watching.
Theresa May's plan was to get the apology in early, then wow her audience with the positive stuff. But this was a speech where very little went to plan. Saying sorry for the election result went smoothly enough.
I hold my hands up for that. I take responsibility. I led the campaign, and I am sorry.
But after that, it went rapidly downhill.
Boris asked me to give...
The comedian Simon Brodkin gate-crashed the party by handing the Prime Minister a spoof P45. Brodkin was ushered away, still performing his comedy routine.
Boris, please say you did this! You asked me to, and now you're denying it! Unbelievable!
But that was the least of her problems. Just as the Prime Minister got into her stride, she began coughing and spluttering.
10 years after Northern Rock, our economy is back on track. The deficit is back to pre-crisis levels.
As her cough got worse, Cabinet colleagues offered a standing ovation to give her breathing space. The Chancellor supplied a cough suite.
I hope you notice that, ladies and gentlemen, the Chancellor giving something away free.
Her audience was supportive, but it was painful. Mrs May promised to fix the housing crisis.
It won't be quick or easy, but as Prime Minister, I'm going to make it my mission to solve this problem, and I'll take personal charge of the government's response.
But the cough wouldn't go away, and the Prime Minister struggled with her voice and her throat.
No. We remember...
And just when her audience thought it couldn't get any worse, the slogan behind her began to fall apart.
Around the globe.
The Prime Minister's pain was felt beyond the walls of the conference hall. These Conservative students were watching in Boris Johnson's West London constituency, wondering if the speech would be a turning point for Mrs May.
She never gave up, and she really battled through no matter what.
She's still on probation, but the tide's turning slightly.
This speech, she's really made a real attempt to appeal to her younger voters.
But it was a speech more likely to be remembered for what went wrong than for what she said.
Look, while some people obviously believe Theresa May had a really bad conference, including that speech, some people think, by contrast, Boris Johnson had a really good one. That was until last night. What went wrong?
Well, to give you a bit of context, there were many at the Tory party angry with Boris Johnson for what they saw as his attempts to grab the headlines and undermine the Prime Minister. But yesterday, his speech was loyal and on message and very well received. Then, just when you thought he might have redeemed himself, along comes a typical Boris Johnson gaffe. Last night at a fringe meeting in Manchester, he suggested a recently liberated city in Libya could be the next Dubai once they've cleared the dead bodies from the streets.
There's a group of UK business people, actually, I don't know whether you have come across them, some wonderful guys who they've got a brilliant vision to turn CERT into the next, with the help of the municipality CERT, to turn it into the next Dubai. The only thing they've got to do is clear the dead bodies.
What you'll notice there is the laughter from the audience. Some MPs think Boris Johnson went too far. His remarks were glib and insensitive, and once again tonight there have been calls for the Prime Minister to sack him.
Simon Harris, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Geraint Vincent. After coughing fits, pranks and a crumbling set, support for Theresa May is in short supply among Conservatives following her party conference speech. One former minister today claimed she's one crisis away from being replaced. But support is still strong in the place the Prime Minister calls home, her Maidenhead constituency. The leader of the council there told ITV News today it's business as usual at number 10. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Maidenhead in Berkshire. It's where Mrs May comes when she wants to be among friends. Right now, she must value those more than ever. As the local MP, she's a familiar face in the town. Greengrocer Anthony Reynolds has seen her often. Did you feel sorry for her yesterday?
Yeah, I don't know really. Do you know what I mean? Sort of, yeah, you do feel sorry for her. She's under attack all the time, isn't she? Sort of. But she's a strong woman, isn't she? She's all right. She don't need me to feel sorry for her.
But across the street, Saad Mushtaq, a local estate agent, thinks there's no way back from her conference speech disaster.
Being the Prime Minister of the greatest country in the world, you don't get second chances, unfortunately, and especially in a live TV, especially in a conference where Boris has just literally his popularity has risen so much.
The Prime Minister's conference speech calamities began when she was ambushed by the serial prankster Simon Brodkin.
Boris, job done there.
Then came the uncontrollable coughing fit.
Why we will never... excuse me.
The final indignity was the disintegration of the slogan behind her. Mrs May's fate is now in the hands of her fellow Conservative MPs. If enough of them are prepared to say they have no confidence in her, a leadership contest is inevitable. It's unclear how many MPs are actively plotting to unseat Mrs May, and none is openly backing a rival. But some MPs, including former cabinet ministers, were reported today to be talking to each other about the possibility of a challenge. Simon Dudley is the leader of her local council in Maidenhead and is a loyal supporter.
I've known Prime Minister Theresa May for a great many years, and one thing you can say about her is she's completely dedicated and purposeful. So it will, for her, be business as usual to work for the residents of this country who both voted Conservative and we hope will vote Conservative the next time.
So you don't think she'll have second thoughts about staying on?
None whatsoever. That is not within Theresa May's DNA.
In this town at least, the Prime Minister has friends she can count on. Simon Harris, ITV News, Maidenhead.